Yap, where we recreate and celebrate historical women's rhetoric. So we know what's been said before us, and we can stand on the shoulders of giants. My name is Helen Keeley. I'm going to kick off this evening with a speech by Virginia Woolf, the celebrated early 20th century writer of novels such as Orlando and Mrs. Dalloway. So she's known for saying a woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. And most people know that comes from an essay entitled A Room of One's Own, but not many people know that essay was based on a series of lectures that Woolf gave at Cambridge University to other wealthy women who had access to education at the time. So, in this excerpt that I'm about to read, Woolf discusses the hurdles that women faced to succeed as a writer during her lifetime. But on closer inspection, those similarities are ones that we struggle with today. And to highlight them, we're going to use this handy lecture tool, the PowerPoint. And I will also need your help. As I said, we recreate this scenario. So you will have to be the lovely women of Cambridge University, the few select women in 1931. If you could just do that for me. Well done, sir. Doing very well. And I will be Virginia Woolf. So Cambridge University, lovely, Virginia Woolf. To tell you my story, it is a simple one. Well, you have only got to figure a girl with a pen in her hand. She had only to move that pen from left to right, from 10 o'clock to 1. Well, then it occurred to her to do what is simple and cheap enough, after all, to slip a few of those pages into an envelope, to fix a penny stamp and drop it into the red box at the corner, and it was thus I became a journalist. And my effort was rewarded. On the first day of the following month, a very glorious day it was for me, by a letter from an editor, containing a cheque for £1, 10 shillings and sixpence. But to show you how little I deserve to be called a professional woman, how little I know of the struggles and difficulties of such lives, I have to admit that instead of spending the money upon bread and butter, rent, shoes and stockings, butcher's bills, I went out and bought a cat. A beautiful cat, a Persian cat, which very soon involved me in bitter disputes with my neighbours. What could be easier than to write articles and buy Persian cats with the profits? Wait a moment, articles have to be about something. Mine, I can't remember, was about a novel by a famous man. And while I was writing this review, I discovered if I were going to review books, I should need to do battle with a certain phantom. And the phantom was a woman. And when I came to know her better, I called her after the heroine of a famous poem, The Angel in the House. It was she who used to come between me and my paper when I was writing reviews. It was she who so bothered me and wasted my time and tormented me that at last I killed her. Oh, you who come of a younger and happier generation may not have heard of her. You may not know what I mean by the angel in the house. I will describe her as shortly as I can. She was intensely sympathetic. She was immensely charming. She was utterly unselfish. She excelled in the difficult arts of family life. She sacrificed her daily. If there was a chicken, she took the leg. If there was a draft, she sat in it. In short, she was so constituted that she never had a mind or wish of her own, but preferred always to sympathize with the minds and wishes of others. Above all, I need not say it, she was pure. Her purity was supposed to be her chief beauty, her blushes, her great grace. In those days, every house had its angel. And when I came to write, I encountered her with those very first words. The shadow of her wings fell on my page. I heard the rustling of her skirts in the room.
Directly, I took my pen in my hand to review that novel by a famous man, and she slipped behind me and whispered, "My dear, you are a woman. You are writing about a novel that has been written by a man. Be sympathetic, be tender, flatter, deceive, use all the arts and wiles of our sex. Never let anybody guess you have a mind of your own. Above all, be pure." And she made as if to guide my pen. I now record the one act for which I take some credit to myself, though rightly the credit belongs to some excellent ancestors of mine who left me a certain sum of money so that it was not necessary for me to depend solely on charm for my living. I turned to her and caught her by the throat. I did my best to kill her. My excuse, if I had to be held up in a court of law, would be I acted in self-defense. Had I not killed her, she would have killed me. She would have plucked the very heart out of my writing.
She was an African-American abolitionist and a women's rights activist. So I'll be performing two versions of this speech. The first was written by Frances Gage, and she was a leading white feminist and an abolitionist in the 19th century. And she will be played by our lovely Jamie. So now, we will transport ourselves back to the year 1851. And you, lovely audience, will be at a women's rights convention in Akron, Ohio. Whoa, children! What is so much racket going on? Something must be out of kilter. I think that twixt the niggers in the South and the women in the North, all talking about rights. Well, that white man will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? Well, that man over there, they say that women needs to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and have the best places everywhere. Well, nobody ever helps me into carriages, or lifts me over mud piles, or gives me the best place. And raising herself to her full height and her voice to a pitch like rolling thunder, she adds, "And ain't I a woman? Look, Mom." And she bared her right arm to the shoulder, showing her tremendous muscular power. "I have plowed and planted and gathered into bonds, and no man could lead me, and ain't I a woman? I would work as much and eat as much when I could get it, and bear the lashes well, and ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, and see most of them all sold off into slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me, and ain't I a woman? Then they talk about, what's that thing that they talk about?
It's intellect.
That's it, honey. What's that got to do with woman's or a nigger's rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and you're on a quart, well, to me not to let me have my little half measure full.
And she pointed her significant finger and sent a keen glance to the man who had made the argument. The cheering was long and loud.
That little man in the back there, he said, women can't have as much rights as men, 'cause Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from?
Rolling thunder could have not stilled the crowd as those deep, wonderful tones, as she stood there with outstretched arms and eyes of fire. Raising her voice still louder, she repeated,
Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with him.
Oh, what a rebuke that was to that little man. Turning again to another objector, she took up the defense of Mother Eve. I could not follow her through it all, but it was pointed and witty and solemn. Listening at almost every sentence, deafening applause, and she ended by asserting,
If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all on her own, then all these women here together will be able to turn it back up, right side up again. And now, they is fixing to do it. The man better let her.
long continued her cheering. Reading that.
Bleed it to you for hearing on me. And now, old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say.
Amid roars of applause. She returned to her corner, leaving more than one of us with streaming eyes and hearts beating with gratitude. She had taken us up in her strong arms and carried us safely over the slough of difficulty, turning the whole tide in our favor. I have never in my life seen anything like the magical influence that subdued the mobbish spirit of the day, turning sneers and jeers of an excited crowd into notes of respect and admiration. Hundreds rushed up to shake hands with her and congratulate the glorious old mother and bid her Godspeed on her mission of
Testifying again concerning the wickedness of these here people. So, in this first version, Gage's voice is ever present as she is the writer. The documentation of any speech is just as important as the speech itself, whether it's written by or recorded by a man recording women's speech, or even the enemy or victor recording a speech, as with Boadicea and Joan of Arc. Here, we have a white woman recording a black woman's rhetoric, and that can be problematic. So some people believe that Gage added the Southern-style dialect to cast Truth as a slave, that this was a caricature, and that Truth would never have had such an accent because she lived in New York all her life. So today, the second version I'm about to read is a reclaimed record. The dialect is mostly cut. Gage's voice is cut. And Truth's message remains. Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women of the North, all talking about rights, the white men will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there, he says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages. Or lifts me over mud piles. Or gives me best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I've plowed and planted and gathered into barns. And no man could heed me. And ain't I a woman? I could eat as much. If I could get it. And bear the whip as well. And ain't I a woman? I've borne 13 children and seen most of them sold into slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in the heat. What they call it? Intellect. That's right. What's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and yours a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? Then that little man in the back, he says that women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with it. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all on her own, then all these women here gathered ought to be able to turn it back, right side up again. And now all of them is fixing to do it. The men had better let her. Obliged to you for hearing from me. And now, old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say.
Not so far. Good evening. I am Alison Lenhan and I am based in Swansea. The first speech I will do for you tonight is by Nora Ephron, and if you haven't heard of her, she is a Jewish-American journalist, playwright, screenwriter, novelist, producer and director. She's probably most well known for her rom-com movies, and she was nominated for 3 Academy Awards for Sleepless in Seattle, Silkwood, and When Harry Met Sally. This speech was given in 1996 to Wellesley College graduates in America. Nora had graduated from the college in 1962, and she was here on this day to give their commencement speech. So you are today graduates in 1996 from Wellesley College, and you are all women. I also find this pretty inspiring. I want to tell you a little bit about my class, the class of 1962. We were girls then, by the way, Wellesley girls. How long ago was it? It was so long ago that while I was here, Wellesley actually threw 6 young women out for lesbianism. It was so long ago that we had curfews. It was so long ago that if you had a boy in your room, you had to leave your door open 6 inches. In my class of, I don't know, maybe 375 women, there were 6 Asians and 5 blacks. And there was a strict quota on the number of Jews. How long ago? If you needed an abortion, you drove to a gas station in Union, New Jersey, with $500 cash in an envelope. You were shown blindfolded into a motel room, and you were operated on without anesthetic. The Crimson Herald had this snippy little article which said that Wellesley was a school for tunicata. Tunicata, apparently being small fish who spend the first part of their lives frantically swimming around the ocean floor, exploring their environment, and the second part of their lives just lying there, breeding. It was mean and snippy, but it had a horrible ring of truth. My class went to college in the era when you got a master's degree in teaching because it was something to fall back on in the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario being that no one married you and you had to go to work. Our education was a dress rehearsal for a life we never had. Isn't that the saddest line? We weren't meant to have futures. We were meant to marry them. We weren't meant to have politics or careers that mattered or opinions. We were meant to marry them. If you wanted to be an architect, you married an architect. Why am I telling you this? It was a long time ago, right? Things have changed, haven't they? Yes, they have. Things are different for you than they were for us. The college you are graduating from is a very different place. The women's movement has made a huge difference too, particularly for young women like you. There are women doctors and women lawyers. There are anchor women, although most of them are blonde. But at the same time, the pay difference between men and women has barely changed. And in my business, the movie business, yeah, there are many more female directors, but it's just as hard to make a movie about women as it ever was. And look at the parts the Oscar-nominated actresses played this year. Hooker, and none. It's 1996, and you are graduating in the year of the Wonder Bra. The Wonder Bra isn't a step forward for women. Nothing that uncomfortable is a step forward for women. But what I'm saying is, there's still a glass ceiling. Don't let the number of women in work force you into thinking any differently. There are still magazines devoted almost exclusively to making the perfect casseroles and turning various things into tents. Above all, be the heroine of your own life, not the victim. Because you don't have the alibi my class did. That is one of the great achievements and mixed blessings you inherit. Unlike us, you can say nobody told you that there were other options. Your education is a dress rehearsal for a life you will get to lead. 25 years from now, you won't have an easy time making excuses as my class did. You won't be able to blame the deans or the culture or anyone else. You will have no one to blame but yourselves. Whoa. Whatever you choose, however many roads you travel, I hope that you choose not to be a lady. I hope you will find some way to break the rules and make a little trouble out there. And I also hope that you will choose to make some trouble on behalf of women. Thank you. Good luck. The first act of your life is over. Welcome to the best years of your life.
Hello everyone, my name is Georgia Griffiths. I'm a 22-year-old actress from Neath, and I'm here to share with you a speech by Charlotte Church, who you probably know. She's a very famous singer from Wales. So the speech I have chosen is from a 2013 John Peel lecture, which is on Six Music, and it's about women's representation in the music industry. So as you would have heard this speech on the radio, I would like you to be relaxed music listeners. I'd like you to imagine a world in which male musicians are routinely expected to act as submissive sex objects. Picture Beyoncé's husband, Jay-Z, stripped down into a tea-back, bikini thong, sex-kittening his way through a boulevard of suited and booted women for their pleasure. Or Britney Spears' ex, Justin Timberlake, in buttock-clenching denim hot pants, riding on the bonnet of a pink Chevy, explaining to his audience why he'd like to be their teenage dream. Now, before we all get a little too hot beneath the gusset, of course, these scenarios are not likely to become a reality, except for comedy scenarios. The reason for this is that these roles that the music industry has carved out specifically for women. It is a male-dominated industry with a juvenile perspective on gender and sexuality. To me, the unattainable sex bot is the most commonly employed and most damaging. A role that is also often claimed to be an empowering one. The irony behind this is that the women generally filling these roles are very young. They are encouraged to present themselves as hypersexualized, unrealistic, cartoonish objects using female sexuality as a prize you can win. When the male perspective is the dominant one, the end point is women being coerced into sexually demonstrated behaviour in order to hold on to their careers. This idea, repeated over generations, can't have a negative effect on women, whether they are in the industry or are not. As a society, we have a lack of comfort with women in authority roles. So, is it simply all down to sexism? Myths about women perpetuated by men? Nicki Minaj seems to think so, and is what is known now as her pickle juice rant. She talks about how she is derided for demanding a certain level of professionalism with the people she works with. She says, "When I am assertive, I'm a bitch. When a man is assertive, he's a boss." So to what extent are these myths about women perpetuated by women themselves? There are countless examples from the last few years of songs that have been in high rotation that have little to no artistic worth, but are just plain rude. BBC Radio is notorious for misreading sexual metaphor and innuendos as innocent. There doesn't seem to be a decency barrier at all, unless you're dealing with words like shit, or fuck, or hippopotamus cock. The terrifying thing is that the target demographic for this type of music is getting younger and younger. Jennifer Lopez seemingly trying to engulf the camera with her vagina on Britain's Got Talent earlier this year is a mild example of how frequently carnal images creep into the realm of what is deemed okay for kids. I support Annie Lennox's plea for ratings on videos. If the power was taken taken away from sex in pop by making it harder for younger viewers to access it, then maybe the focus would shift to making works of artistic beauty and conscience. And fundamentally, that would actually be putting the power back in sex for a future world where women are able to portray their sexuality as it is for them.
Thank you. Hi, guys. Hi, everyone. As you can see, it took an army to make me strong and willing again to do it. But thank you all from the bottom of my heart. 5 years ago, when I was last here, I also was pregnant and I didn't know. And I was awarded that shortly after. I found out shortly after, which was the biggest blessing of my life. And in my pregnancy and through becoming a mother, I've lost a lot of myself. And I've struggled, and I still do struggle being a mum. It's really hard. But tonight, winning this kind of feels like it's come full circle, and a little bit of me has come back to myself. But I can't possibly accept this award. I'm very humble, and I'm very grateful and gracious, but my artist of my life is Beyonce, and this album to me, the Lemonade album, is just so monumental, Beyonce. It's so monumental and so well thought out and beautiful and soul-bearing, and we got to see another side of you that you don't always let us see. And we appreciate that. All us artists, we fucking adore you. You are our light. And the way you make me and my friends feel, the way you make my black friends feel, is empowering. And you make them stand up for themselves. And I love you. I always have, always will. Grammys, I appreciate it. The Academy, I love you. My manager, my husband, my son, you're the only reason I do it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to everybody.
The magazine that has Beyonce on the cover, one can deconstruct for days. First, she's looking like a kind of deer to headlights and wearing the little bra and panty set that some of us wore when we were 10 or 12. And I'm thinking, isn't it interesting that she's supposedly being held up as one of the most important people in our nation, in the world, and yet, why did they use that image? I mean, she's not glam. What is that cover meant to say about the black female body? Let's take the image of this super rich, very powerful black female, and let's use it in the service of imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, because she probably had very little control over that image, that cover. So you're saying that from my deconstructive point of view, she's colluding with the construction of herself as a slave. It's not a liberatory image. I think it's a fantasy that we can recoup the violating image and use it. I used to get so tired of people quoting Audrey. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. But that was exactly what she meant. That you are not going to destroy this imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy by creating your own version of it. Even if it serves you to make you lots and lots of money. I've really been challenging people to think about, would we be at all interested if Beyonce wasn't so rich? Because I don't think you can separate her class power and the wealth from people's fascination with her. That here is a young black woman who is so incredibly wealthy, and wealthy is what so many young people fantasize, dream about, sexualize, eroticize. And one could argue even more than her body. It's what that body stands for. The body of desire fulfilled, that is wealth, fame, celebrity, all these things that so many people in our culture are lusting for, wanting. If Beyonce was a homeless woman who looked the same way, down and out, who looked the same way, would people be enchanted by her? Or is it the combination of all those things that are at the heart of imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy? I see a part of Beyonce that is in fact anti-feminist, that is a terrorist. This speech was by Bell Hooks. So she's an African-American activist, writer, and feminist. And this conversation took place before Lemonade was released.
Hello again. Hi. I'm going to perform this time a speech by Andrea Dworkin. Now, Dworkin, if you don't know her, is probably kind of what people think of as like a monster archetype feminist. So she'd be described as a fat, scary, hairy, dungaree wearing, aggressive woman, basically. Dworkin was a radical feminist and writer, an activist whose work has always been controversial in some way. But whether you agree or you might strongly disagree with her views on pornography or gender, she is an important historical figure in feminism, and perhaps much more nuanced, intellectual than you might think at first glance. So I'm going to perform today an excerpt from a speech she gave at the Midwest Regional Conference of the National Organization for Changing Men in 1983 in St. Paul, Minnesota. So you will now be 500 men. So if you could multiply yourself, think man. After she did this speech, she described it as, in a sense, a feminist dream come true. What would you say to 500 men, if you could? And here is some of what she said. I've watched the men's movement for many years. I am close with some of the people who participate in it. I can't come here as a friend, even though I might very much want to. What I would like to do is to scream. And in that scream, I would have the screams of the raped and the sobs of the battered. And even worse, in the center of that scream, I would have the deafening sound of women's silence. A silence to which we are born because we are women, and in which most of us die. And if there would be a plea, or a question, or a human address in that scream, it would be this: why are you so slow? Why are you so slow to understand the simplest things? Not the complicated ideological things, you understand those. It's the simple things, the cliches. Simply that women are human to precisely the degree and quality that you are. And also that we do not have time. We women, we don't have forever. Some of us don't have another day or another week for you to take time for you to discuss whatever it is that will enable you to go out onto those streets and to do something. We are very close to death. All women are. And we are very close to rape, and we are very close to beating. I want to see this men's movement make a commitment to ending rape, because that is the only meaningful commitment to equality. It is astonishing that in all our worlds of feminism and anti-sexism, we never talk seriously about ending rape. Ending it. Stopping it. No more. No more rape. In the back of our minds, are we holding on to its inevitability as the last preserve of the biological? Do we think it's always going to exist, no matter what we do? All of our political actions are lies if we don't make a commitment to ending the practice of rape. This commitment has to be political, it has to be serious, it has to be systematic, it has to be public. It can't be self-indulgent. The things the men's movement have wanted are things worth having. Intimacy is worth having. Tenderness is worth having. Cooperation is worth having. But you can't have equality or tenderness or intimacy as long as there is rape. Because rape means terror. It means that part of the population lives in a state of terror and pretends to please, to pacify you that it doesn't. So there is no honesty. How can there be? Have you ever wondered why we're not just in armed combat against you? It is not because there is a shortage of kitchen knives in this country. It is because we believe in your humanity against all the evidence. As a feminist, I carry the rape of all of the women I've talked to over the last 10 years personally with me. As a woman, I carry my own rape with me. Do you remember pictures that you've seen of European cities during the plague? And they would have a wheelbarrow that would go along and people would just pick up corpses and throw them in. Well, that is what it's like knowing about rape. Piles and piles and piles of bodies that have whole lives and human names and human faces. I speak for many feminists, not only myself, and I tell you that I am tired of what I know and sad beyond any words I have about what has already been done to women up until this point. On this day, here in this place. And I want one day of respite. One day off. One day in which no new bodies are piled up. One day in which no new agony is added to the old. And I'm asking you to give it to me. And how could I ask you for less? It is so little. And how could you offer me less? It is so little. Even in wars, there are days of truce. Go and organize a truce. Stop your side for one day. I want a 24-hour truce during which there is no rape. And on that day of truce, that day when not one woman is raped, we will begin the real practice of equality. Because we can't begin it before that day. Before that day, it means nothing. Because it is nothing. It's not real. It's not true. But on that day, it becomes real. And then instead of rape, we will, for the first time in our lives, both men and women, begin to experience freedom. If you have a conception of freedom that includes the existence of rape, you are wrong. For myself, I want to experience just one day of real freedom before I die. And I'll leave you here to do that for me and for the women whom you say you love. Andrea died in 2005 and her wish had not been fulfilled. Dworkin challenged a group she thought needed challenging, and perhaps still do. What would you say to 500 men, or maybe 500 politicians?
Here's what Diane Abbott, Labour MP for Hackney, said to a room full of politicians just this week. We are not talking here about robust debates, however robust it is. We are talking about mindless abuse. And in my case, the mindless abuse has been characteristically racist and sexist. And just to outline, I've had death threats. I've had people tweeting that I should be hung if, quote, they could find a tree big enough to take the fat bitch's weight. There was an EDL-affiliated Twitter account, #BurnDianeAbbott. I've had rape threats, described as a pathetic, useless, fat, black piece of shit, ugly, fat, black bitch, and nigger, over and over again. And when my members of staff said that when people ask her, when is the most surprising thing about coming to work for me, the most surprising thing for her is how often she has to read the word nigger. And this comes through emails, through Twitter, through Facebook. But where I disagree with the Honourable Gentleman, he seems to suggest that this is all a relatively recent thing, around the time at the election. This is not my experience. This really is not my experience. It is certainly true that the online abuse that I experienced and others experience has got worse in recent years and does get worse at election time. But I don't put it down to a particular election. I think the rise in the use of online turbocharged abuse is because, 30 years ago, when I became MP, if you wanted to attack an MP, you had to write a letter, usually in green ink. You had to put it in an envelope. You had to put a stamp on it. And you had to walk to the post box. Now, they press a button and you read vile abuse, which 30 years ago, people would have been frightened to even write down. So I said that male politicians get abused too, but I hope the one thing we can agree on in this chamber is that it is much worse for women. And I think as well as the rise online, anonymity is the thing. People would not come up to me and attack me for being a nigger in public, but they'll do it online. And I'm telling you, this is not once a week. This is not during election time. This is every day.
Hello again. When I was invited to take part in Yap Yap Yap, I was asked to choose a speech by a Welsh woman from history. And during my research, I have come across the most incredible women. I feel like I'm an expert now in Welsh history. I'm not really. But I've loved learning about these Welsh women. But unfortunately, what I found was very few Welsh women's speeches were documented or recorded. However, I have chosen a council election speech by Rhondda's Annie Powell. I'm not going to tell you when the speech was given, because I want you to listen to its content, and then I will ask some of you later when you think this speech was written. A message to Rhondda women. Only a woman can really understand the serious problems facing the women of Rhondda today. Yes, it's true, we get more work and we get more money to handle, but we know that with the high price of food, fuel and rent, our money doesn't go very far. Nearly every house in the Rhondda is damp and there is serious overcrowding. Our old people are having a hard time just making ends meet. My aim is to change these things. And as a woman, I ask you women to vote for me. All my life, I've lived among the people of Rhondda. I was born in a Welsh-speaking house, and I trained as a school teacher and started my teaching career in Shalom during days of mass unemployment and heartbreaking poverty. My experiences made me burn with indignation. And ever since, I have given all my energy to the great struggle of the working class. Year in and year out, Rhondda mothers and wives perform miracles, struggling to make ends meet, bringing up their families and keeping them clothed and in good health. They have to wage this battle in overcrowded houses, badly equipped and so damp as to cause serious threat to good health. In those days when my husband and I were active members of the Methodist Church in Tonopandi, I helped to raise funds to provide the kids with boots and clothes and assisted the mighty campaigns against mass unemployment and the means test. I recognised then that it was this party that was leading the great fight, and my place was in its ranks. Nothing but the best is good enough for our splendid young people in the Rhondda. We have the right to be proud of our sportsmen, artists, musicians, actors and writers. Our young people need better facilities for education, training, playing fields, cycle tracks, gymnasiums and concert halls. And the greatest debt of all, we owe to our old age pensioners. They should not have to rely on charity. They deserve a pension sufficient to provide them with their needs. Rhondda needs an MP who remains true to the principles of the old Labour pioneers. They need someone who fights against the policies of Labour Toryism. They need an MP who will voice the real opinions of the ordinary men and women of the Rhondda and who stand for genuine Labour principles. In this general election, both the Tory and Labour candidates in Rhondda East agree on all basic questions, and both favour cooperation with the United States in its war plans. This party's policy is the only way forward for the Rhondda people. And in the interests of peace and security and socialism, I ask you to give me your vote. So, it took Annie 13 attempts to finally be elected as the communist councillor. She was known as Red Annie. She served in the council for 20 years and she was made the communist mayor in 1979. And so for our final speech this evening, I'd like to introduce you to probably the most famous female politician of our country.
I'll start you think. So from 1950, it's now 1980. We're in Brighton, and you are one of the largest UK political parties, and I am Margaret Thatcher.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, most of my cabinet colleagues have started off their speeches of reply by paying very well-deserved tribute to their junior ministers. At number 10, I have no junior ministers. There is just Dennis and me, and I could not do without him. In the first 17 months, this government has laid the foundations for recovery. Under Jeffrey's leadership, Britain has repaid $3,600 of international debt which has been run up by our predecessors, and we paid quite a lot of it back before it was due. This government thinks about the future. If spending money like water was the answer to our country's problems, we would have no problems now. If ever a nation has spent again, ours has. Today the dream is over. All of that money has got us nowhere, but it still has to come from somewhere. Without a healthy economy, we cannot have a healthy society. To those waiting with bated breath for that favorite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The lady's not for turning. I say that not only to you, but to our friends overseas, and to those who are not our friends. In foreign affairs, we have pursued our national interest robustly, while remaining alive to the needs and interests of others. Long before we came into office, and therefore long before the invasion of Afghanistan, I was pointing to the threat from the East. I was accused of scaremongering, but events have more than justified my words. The Soviet Union cannot conduct wars by proxy in Southeast Asia and Africa, foment trouble in the Middle East and Caribbean, and invade neighboring countries and still expect to conduct business as usual. That is the message we shall be delivering loud and clear at the European Security Conference. We are acquiring, with the cooperation of the United States government, the Trident missile system. This will ensure the credibility of our strategic deterrent until the end of the century and beyond. And it was very important for the reputation of Britain abroad that we should keep our independent nuclear deterrent as well as for our citizens here. In Europe, we have shown that it is possible to combine a vigorous defense of our own interests with a deep commitment to the idea and to the ideals of community. The British government intends to stand by these great institutions, the European community and NATO. We will not betray them. We close our conference in the aftermath of that sinister utopia unveiled at Blackpool. Let Labour's Orwellian nightmare of the left be the spur for us to dedicate with a new urgency our every ounce of energy and moral strength to rebuild the fortunes of this free nation. If we were to fail, that freedom could be imperiled. So let us resist the blandishments of the faint hearts. Let us ignore the howls and threats of the extremists. Let us stand together and do our duty, and we shall not fail. Well done, everyone. The battle between the UK's major political parties and the global political narrative are almost identical, and Thatcher's speech shows us this. It contains perhaps one of the most famous sound bites from a woman's speech in history, "The lady's not for turning." And think of all the sound bites you know from speeches given by men. I have a dream. An eye for an eye. Ich bin ein Berliner. Women's speeches have been systematically silenced from history, and that is why Yap 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 recreates and celebrates historical women's rhetoric. But we want all of you today to think about the speeches you want to make, what you want to say and how you want to say them.
So we got some tips, didn't we? From Dr. Susan Jones, who is a speechwriter to Prime Ministers, to help us all become amazing orators. So here are her top 5 tips. Number 1, speeches are divided into 3 types. First one's about the past. These are forensic.
This lecture is entitled "The History of This Banner."
About the present, these are ceremonial.
A toast to the bride and groom. Always a bridesmaid, never a bride.
About the future, now these are political.
Brexit means hard Brexit.
Number 2, open with something everyone can agree on.
We all love cheese.
Now you have to set up the complication.
There isn't enough cheese.
So offer them a solution.
Invest in cheese.
Number 3, make sure you know who's going to be for you, so in this case,
Cheese lovers, the friend.
and who's going to be against you. Vegan. How do we get them to be for you?
Invest in vegan cheese.
Number 4, think about timing. When can you step on the wave?
If anybody has any objections to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace.
No, probably a different place might be the right time. And number 5, finally, you have to get your audience on side.
Hello everyone, are we enjoying Troublemakers Festival tonight?
Thank you very much. We have been Yap Yap Yap. You can follow @Gaggle, home of Gaggle Productions, for info about future shows. Thank you very much.